Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you to the organizers for inviting me. It was a great presentation, so I'm not going to spend much time on summarizing the results, but going straight to some constructive criticism of this work. Now, so where does this fit in? So it fits into this literature that is emerging in corporate finance related to CSR. And so people are looking at explanations for heterogeneity in CSR, and so then we can look at this in aggregate in the time series and also for different firms. Why do they change their CSR policy and strategy? And people are also looking in the cross-section. So why is it that some firms, they spend more on CSR compared to others? And this could be because of it's optimal, so they are optimizing, so the marginal benefit of spending some dollar on CSR is higher than the marginal cost. Could be because of a private benefit story, which fits most closely with this paper here. Then there's some more behavioral explanations as well, related to maybe corporate culture, the specific preferences that CEOs they may have. And then what about the valuation effects? So it could be that CSR might enhance the value of a company. If, say, employee benefits, they are good for workers, make them more productive, or it increases the retention rate for workers, then it could enhance the value. Could have a sort of a neutral effect, so no valuation effect at all, or it could be sort of an agency cost. So let me go from some more specific comments to start with, and then I go to the big picture towards the end. And so first of all, then I think this is sort of an ambitious paper in the sense that it takes on both number 1 and number 2 here, using some contemporary econometric methods. Some concerns that I have about how the paper is currently sort of pitched. So if we look at the different bins here, so these are the quintiles with respect to insider ownership, managerial ownership. So we go from the lowest to the highest. And the mid-level here, quote-unquote mid-level, is a very low level. Well, of course, these are S&P 500 companies, so it's not that surprising maybe, but it's 0.33% ownership by the top insiders. And so now what is striking to me when I plot out this picture using the data from the paper is obviously the 5th quintile here. And I'm starting to think about founder CEOs. And even for these large companies, S&P 500 companies, there are a number of founder CEOs that are in place. And they are special in some sense. And they may have a special attitude with respect to corporate social responsibility because of legacy effects or whatever. And so there are a couple of different approaches I think that you may want to take here. You could control for founder CEOs if they are present in the firm. Now, this will not be soaked up by a firm fixed effect, right? Because some of the founder CEOs, they step down, they never come back. Some step down, they come back. They're boomerang CEOs. Howard Schultz of Starbucks, for example. So this is sort of not absorbed in the paper. And I would also rely somewhat less on the comparison with this 5th quintile because of these issues here. And what is it that I'm worrying about? My concern is that these founder CEOs, they become sort of more wealthy from 2003 onwards because of the dividend tax cut. And because they have large incentives because of this ownership, but also have large control. And we don't have dual class shares among these firms, so it's difficult to separate between the control and the incentive aspect. So maybe they spend more on CSR. And this sort of U-shaped relationship that you're talking about, could that be because of some of these founder CEOs? They now decided to spend at the margin somewhat more on CSR because of their legacy effects, because they are becoming wealthier. So again, I would sort of focus more on sort of this set of firms here. Now, my next comment is, if you look at sort of the overall changes in terms of CSR score, so this is the corporate goodness score that we see up here, it's quite a dramatic change overall if we look at the averages, basically from 0.66 to 0.335, so it's quite significant reduction. And it's a much larger number of firms that reduce their CSR in the post-event period. So now, is this solely attributable to this 2003 event? Or are there possibly some other contaminating effects? So one event that happened around this time is SOX. And so now the counter argument, so I'm both the discussant and I also give the counter argument. Maybe you would have this argument back with the nonlinearity. I really like that paragraph of your paper where you say that an alternative story also need to come up with this non-linear aspect for the relationship. And maybe SOX, if you think it through, that's your role, not my role to think that through, then maybe with SOX you can rule this out. So that's the good news with the non-linearity. But this also means that if you can conclusively rule out those other alternatives, you're stuck with this very big change, and you're attributable everything to this particular event. And is it then too big of an effect, so to speak, to be plausible? Now, if you break it down into the different categories, that's what I did here. Which ones changed most, pre versus post, okay? And so then we can see, for example, if you look at environment up there, didn't change that much. If you look at employees, for example, that's where you have that category changed more dramatically. So they sort of reduced CSR scores overall. And was this expected a priori? So I'm not quite sure what to sort of expect about this, and I would like you guys to think that through a little bit more. On that same point, sort of my sub-point number 2 here is if you do the diff and diff by different CSR categories. Now, this is not easy to do. You don't get a lot of significant things going on. You acknowledge that in the paper, so that's very good. Basically, because I don't like the comparison so much with the high ownership quintile because of the potential the founder CO effect, I sort of put them here in the whiteout, in the cloud, in the snow, and so I focus on the others. And then I start to look for stars. And I don't see that many stars. I see a couple of them here. It's basically for the environment dimension. Now, so the argument in the paper is that these are very noisy, these subcategories, and I agree with that. I've worked with these data myself recently and agree with this. This is not uncommon that you don't get very strong statistical significance. And you could even break this down into subcategories. It would be even worse. That would be my prediction. But I do encourage you to think about sort of, what about the irreversibility of these different subcategories? Suppose I'm a CEO, and it's now 2003, and the event has happened, and I know that I spend too much on CSR. So now I'm going to cut something, okay, because it's a waste. So what am I going to cut? Well, here are the different alternatives of what I could cut. So some of them, because of the nature of those investments, might be sort of irreversible. It's just not possible to this green technology plant that you have built to sort of reverse that. So what could you reverse in the short term, and what could not very easily be reversed? So I would like some more discussion about that in the paper. And this is just a piece, sort of an anecdotal piece. I just came across this a couple of days ago when I was reading the paper here first. And so basically, if we look at the employee benefits, that particular category, so different companies have different employee benefits. And think about the different costs and the possibility of reversing this. So Netflix, for example, so they offer 1 year paid maternity, paternity leave for new parents, right? In my home country of Sweden, this would be nothing. Only 1 year, but in the US, this is a very big deal, right? This is like breaking record, probably for all the different firms. Now, so this would be rather costly and might not be that easy to reverse, right? Or you get the union after you get the mob of, the lynch mob of all the employees if you try to reverse this. Because we're skiing, then Burton, their snowboard, they give a season, sort of a ski pass and snow days. So here, literally, the cost would be determined by nature, right? It snows, it's a big cost for this particular benefit. It doesn't snow, then not a very big cost. Evernote, so they have an economy program, offers team building courses like macaroon baking. So this doesn't strike me as that costly. Maybe we can reverse that, and it might be quite easy. Here's one of my favorites. Accenture offer gender reassignment for the employees. It's good to have this real option, I guess, for everyone that might consider this. If you take away that real option, that's sort of not a good thing, but sort of unconditionally, not too many people will exercise this option. And this is my absolute favorite. There's the Zillow. They allow employees who are traveling to ship their breast milk. And the question is sort of how many people would do this. So the serious point is think about what are the costs of the different type of programs, and not only employee, but all the different programs, and what about the irreversibility and nature of those different programs. Now, what about the economic significance of the findings? So here I tried to plot out the cumulative changes in CSR score for those mid-level ownership firms compared to those low-level ownership. So basically Q3 versus Q1. And so what we can see here sort of is that the effect is strengthening over time. I think this is good and bad again. It is good because the fact that here is the event happens over here, and then the effect may not start to show up immediately because it may take some time to change those CSR-related programs. So the effect will show up over time, so it gets stronger and stronger. That's sort of the good news. Now, the bad news, at least the way I see it, is that once we get over here, something weird happened in my slides as well, apparently. Once we get over here, we're then 4 years away from the event. So then it becomes more difficult to really believe that it is completely driven by the event. And then I try to do and take it for what it is. The big picture here should be more, maybe you guys should do something like this on your own. I tried to do something related to economic significance. So basically, if it didn't say value there, it would have said minus 0.53. And this is reduction of 0.5 point of CSR score over a period of 4 years in the post period. So I divide this by 4, I get 0.14 per year. And then I want a mapping sort of between CSR score and something that has to do with cash flows, SG&A expenses. So I was trying to look at some recent papers and see what they were referring related to this. And so if we say that one CSR score is approximately about 50 million, the idea is that to have some of these programs, some of them I just described before, it will cost the firm some money. It could come from SG&A expenses. Of course, it could also be CapEx and an investment. So this might underestimate the impact. Now, so this is about 6.6 million less in agency cost per year. Okay, so let's just look at a simple perpetuity with some constant growth. This is about maybe 74 or so million in total present value terms. Now, so this is quite small compared to the stock return effect. Take 8.2% times the market cap of an S&P 500 firm back around the time that this was done. So it could, of course, be that the stock market is sort of overreacting to this, or it could be that something is omitted. So I would look into this a little bit more and see what's going on. They do acknowledge, and in the presentation as well, that the effect that we see here, it might pick up a variety of different things. My fourth and last point has to do with these foundation contributions. So what do we see here? So basically, this is the contributions to those corporate foundations that are being made. And so we focus on these effects here, the 7.4 and the 10.54. So this is basically the way to think about this is how much less that are contributing by those firms in the Q3 compared to those that are in the Q1. So these effects here, 7.4 million, 10.54 million, are actually quite huge, I think, compared to the overall average amount of corporate foundation contribution made by those Q3 firms. So it seems like they almost like eliminate this completely, the foundation contributions. So now, if we look at in aggregate, in terms of contributions to foundations, actually the way I infer the data in the paper, maybe I'm wrong, but the way I read it is that in aggregate there's sort of an increase in contributions by foundations. Not by the Q3 guys. Those guys sort of do not change a whole lot. But the Q1, they increase, as far as I interpret the data, and Q5, they also increase. So I'm asking the question then whether the effect here for the Q3 is not driven by Q3 firms reducing the foundation contribution, but maybe by these guys here at the extreme end, they're actually increasing their contributions instead. And this, I think, is a very nice part of the paper, and they should get a lot of credit for all the data work that must have gone into looking at this and the foundation contributions, digging out all the PDFs from GuideStar and so on. Now, the foundations, so this is the sort of the donations by some of the wealthiest people that we see here, and it looks like overall it goes down. Total donations among these wealthiest people seems to decline by about 14.7%, that's this number up here compared to this number down here, around this dividend tax cut. So there's some evidence for substitution, maybe, at least the way I see it. Firms donate more, though not Q3 firms, and wealthier individuals, they donate less. So let me sort of summarize and give some big picture suggestions here. I think that there is a smoking gun that you have found. It is probably even enough for an indictment. And so firms, they seem to overinvest. But the question is whether the jury will convict based on this evidence. So I would focus a little bit more on additional economic analysis in addition to sort of the econometric analysis that have been done related to the identification. And I find this result most interesting that you do sort of towards the end, where you look at potential substitutions between corporate giving and the giving by people themselves. And so that's where I encourage you to spend some more time. That's one path forward to increase the economic content of the paper. There are other possibilities as well. For example, thinking about what specifically are the private benefits. So this is consistent with the smoking gun here that firms appear to overinvest in CSR. What are the specific private benefits that the CEOs they get? And to looking into that a little bit more, that's another direction. So very promising and important research agenda as CSR is becoming more and more salient and in the media and in academic work. So I encourage you to continue on this path and do more great papers. Thank you very much.